13. Fragments of now. Ace thought she was going in circles. Once she had crossed the stream, she pedalled the protesting bike towards the buildings on the far bank. They were newer edifices on this side, no less jumbled in layout or style, but not tumble down. The empty streets were not filled with rubble, yet it was all too familiar, very grey and frighteningly quiet, as if a new version of the city on the first bank had been constructed when the original wore out. The silence unnerved her. She had grown up in a city and never known what real silence was until she went on a school camping trip. She had woken at 4 in the morning in a tent in a field, and she had been shaking. The silence had woken her. A silent city was even worse. She rode cautiously, fearing every corner and junction in case the clatter of the bike attracted guards, or worse. The lurching, squelching gait of the obscene, city-grey monster lingered in her head, its jaws slobbering. Deja vu city! She passed the cloud-covered wall, freshly painted, and the arcade, dappled down its length with a dull mosaic of coloured twilight. The fierce stars cast the patterns through the stained glass roof, forming a glade in a crystal woodland below. The place was deserted. The new tenants had not turned up. She chewed on one of her biscuits and began to plan ahead. Ace's survival strategy. But it always turned out as, what would the doctor do if? 1. What good are empty pockets? Fill your pockets with anything that looks useful, like he did. But the doctor's voluminous, dimensionally transcendental, she suspected, pockets were reserved for portable items. The TARDIS had been overflowing with all manner of disparate paraphernalia, most of it knee-deep in dust. And you can't beat a couple of cans of Nitro 9. She missed that as much as anything. 2. Always give any person you meet the utmost benefit of the doubt and greet them accordingly. If they're friendly, they'll like you. If not, it confuses them. Oh, come on, Professor. They just start shooting sooner. How'd you get away with it? Why don't I have the knack? And do giant slobbering leeches count as people? Her plan got no further. She was distracted by a cluster of tiny lights that lay in the centre of a street. She dismounted from the bike, anxious to look at something actually living in the dry urban desert. It was a tight cluster of flowers, its crimson petals velvet soft, but jagged like torn flames. At the heart of each tiny blossom, a fierce little light burned, proclaiming the plant's triumphant survival over its conditions. It had sprouted from a dark trail of dried green slime. She grimaced and moved on quickly to get off the open street. She hadn't given up on finding a bath yet. Down a tilt-walled alley, ducking the whales until she emerged from the far end and skidded to a halt. The déjà vu was more than just a feeling. She knew she had somehow come in a circle. She was facing a wide grey plain crossed by a distant silver stream, and there were bicycle tracks in the dust. But she had cycled the other way, not this way. She rode on, following the tracks until she reached the ditch where she had found the doctor's bike. It was already lying there, freshly abandoned, without any dried roots twining through its framework. The battered, rusty bicycle she was riding, that she had discovered half an hour ago, also lay in the ditch in front of her, waiting for her to find it. She nearly laughed out loud, but only to stop herself crying. New bikes for old bikes for even older. This was crazy. She started to wheel her bike away from the new one. She didn't dare touch it. And across the silver stream, beyond the water wheel, lay the city she had just been to, rearing above her, about to topple in and crush her. The silence was deafening. There were heads watching her from the ridge. 4 heads floating like marker buoys on a ground mist where the smoke forest had once been. She didn't care anymore, so she walked towards them. The 4 phasals rose up out of the mist, and it ruffled and drifted. They began to bunch together as if they were afraid of her. They had been sitting on a suite composed at random of a moth-eaten sofa, a seaside deck chair, and a gold-painted throne with carved dragons. The chairs were arranged in a row like grandstand seats at QPR. The sofa was from the TARDIS console room, something else that had washed up and crashed out in the city. "Old lady crushed by low-flying sofa. Act of God blamed," read the headline. "God strikes again. Kapow! Duck down! Continental quilts." She recognised the closest Faisal as Peccary. "Oi, you lot," she called. "I want to know what's going on round here. And where's Shonzi?" They were different from when she had last seen them. Their hair was short and their clothes new. Their coats were gone, their faces not so drawn or old or full of lived with terror. "Don't come nearer," warned Peccary. "You what?" she said. "Who are you? What do you want with us?" "Listen, Grumblies," she complained. "Don't give me that gaff. I'm Ace. It wasn't that long since we were having tea together. What are you lot doing out here?" So much for number 2 in Ace's strategy, she thought. "We do not know you," stated Peccary. "The winds of the gods have driven us to this forsaken wasteland. We don't know what horrors this place may conjure up to plague us." "Who are you calling a horror?" She faltered as she saw his face. His eyes blazed angrily, both of them. His cheek was unscarred. His blind white eye was normal. She started to back off. The place she had started off in hadn't happened yet. The bike, the eye, the younger Faisals. She had slipped back somehow. The older Peccary she had met had already known who she was, but here he didn't. She'd fallen through a wormhole in time, or gone through a wardrobe, or whatever you did when you didn't have a police box. She went on the defensive. "I'm not here to attack you. Your ship crashed, right? And you're trapped here." "Our ship was destroyed," said Peccary. "Yeah, well, the same thing happened to us. We're all on the DOS." "Us?" said Amnoni. "I mean me." She decided there and then to leave the Doctor out of it, particularly considering the bad press he'd been getting from them in the future. "What ship were you travelling in?" said Peccary. "A time ship?" "Yeah, it was destroyed. I told you." The heavy man, Ryogus, stepped forward, all energy barely controlled. "We were attacked before we crashed." "Thank you, Ryogus," said Peccary warily. He studied Ace with his 2 eyes, one safe, the other doomed. "The ship that attacked us was piloted by a being known as the Doctor. His act of hostility has trapped us here. Were you with him?" "Never heard of him," she heard her voice saying, and she never forgave herself for it. She thought she heard thunder somewhere in the distance. Amnoni stepped forward, laying a restraining hand on Peccary's arm. "We don't know you, but you spoke of the pilot. If you know where the child is, then for pity's sake tell us." "If you mean Shonzi, I wouldn't call him a kid," Ace said. "So you have seen him?" "Yeah, you could say that. In another part of the city." Immediately the others were turning to each other, looks of relief uncurling on their faces. "I told you he'd be around somewhere," laughed Ryogus. "That's 3 treasons you owe me, Peccary." Their laughter sounded out of place, like a disco in a graveyard. Ace turned away, her thoughts racing. All she had done was cross a stream. She had come to this city from the same city in the future, just by crossing a stream. And when she looked across this bank, there was another city beyond another stream. She remembered Peccary's story. A great city where time flows strangely and is fed by many tributaries, and people meet their memories. So was the next city in the past or the future? If she kept going, would she eventually reach a point in time where she would find the Doctor? Overhead, a red star was winking like the light on a plane wing. "Where is he now?" Peccary was saying. "Is he safe?" "Who? Shonzi?" She shrugged. "I don't know. The guards were chasing us. We got split up. He can look after himself." She studied them hard, forcing herself to accept that they were the same people she had spoken to before. Only then they had looked like their own grandparents. "How long have you been here?" she asked. Peccary sighed. "Since the beginning." "The beginning?" she mocked. "Wow! How long's that then?" In the beginning, when the process created the world and destroyed the evil doctor. Ace bit her lip and went cold. What do you mean, destroyed? Amnoni pointed down the ridge. We witnessed their battle, just down there on the banks of the stream. The evil doctor was vanquished and cast down. Down where? Demanded Ace. When? Before the process enslaved us, Amnoni said. When we were still chronauts. Before we were betrayed by Vale. Ace's heart sank. There were no answers, just more questions. Like leaping from one stepping stone to the next, one city to the next. How far did you have to keep going? Who's Vale? She said, and saw the hatred on the Faisals' faces. Vale Voriansti Chevrel ran away across the dusty plain. The chronauts saw him pause close to the stream and then switch directions, following its course into the rising distance. What's he playing at? Exclaimed Amnoni. He's going the wrong way. But they still waited. The shock of the crash robbed them of initiative or suspicion. Time was counted in the clanking of the mill wheel. The stream's looking-glass surface was unbroken. There was no further sign of the doctor. Buried in their minds, desperately groping for the strings of each other's lost thoughts, they never noticed the line of figures crossing the stones from the far bank. 6 angular creatures with bulbous red heads swathed in multiple eyes. Whips cracked, and they were surrounded. Below them, another massive shape arched its way across the stream. Beside it came a figure they knew and would hate forever. Vale swaggered in the service of his new master. Captain Peccary stood slowly up, but the bite of a whip knocked him to the ground before the approaching monster. The process stopped to survey its prisoners and their insect-headed overseers. It moved its massive head to observe Vale as he stepped forward as its emissary. You have a new god, he announced. Behold the process who has delivered you from the clutches of evil. On this day, the process has vanquished the tyrant known as the Doctor, the one who sought to trap your molten souls. The Doctor is overthrown and destroyed. You have seen it. Rejoice and serve the process well. In return, you shall receive food and care. Serve the process with your gratitude. The process, its every breath a rasping growl, surveyed them. Ryoga stumbled to his feet. Monster! Send us home! We don't belong here! 2 whips cracked out, their wicked tongues binding his arms and holding him in check. The guards chittered angrily. Home? Said Vale. And where is that? The chronauts stared amongst themselves. The past eluded them. They were lost and alone. The future is stolen, the process croaked. You are Faisals. This city phase. It must be searched for the stolen future. The search. Begin it here. The Doctor is destroyed. The stolen future. It must be found. Sorry about that, smiled Vale. But what could I do? Time whirled inside Shonzi's brain. It was as meaningless in his head as anywhere in the city. The beginning was still occurring somewhere. They had yet to find the ending. There is only now. Somewhere the pilot, just a desperate kid with tangled red-gold hair, was running from what he had seen, leaving the others trapped. And Shonzi had been running ever since. Lucky I got you before the guards, said Vale. Who for? Shonzi tried to focus, but it was easier to lie face down, staring at his own misty reflection in the steel plate ledge on which they waited. Through the pain in his head, he could hear the whir and clack in the walls, telling him he was where he had always dreaded. A prisoner in the watchtower at last. But Ace was still free, he hoped. The ledge rested on iron struts, like a nest high amongst the naked mechanics of the tower. A single platform which rose from the depths below seemed to be the only way up or down. Shonzi's wrists hurt behind his back. He could feel bindings cutting into the skin. How did I get here? The guards were almost on you, said Vale, somewhere above him. I pulled you out of the way. You hit your head. Nasty. What against? A rock held by you? There was a smile in Vale's voice. You're very heavy to drag all that way, Shonzi, but I needed you. I don't collaborate. You knew you'd get caught sooner or later. You can't escape the inevitable. You're in trouble, aren't you? Not as much as you. Can't find the future, but can't escape it either. He pulled Shonzi's head round, forcing the young man to twist over to stop his neck breaking. I'm all right, so you're all right, Vale sneered. Shonzi bit his lip and lunged helplessly towards his taunter. You dare touch that kid! Vale spread his hands in mock conciliation. I touch that kid, and you won't be here, Shonzi. He kicked Shonzi in the ribs. Still pretty solid, aren't you? So the kid's all right. It would be a lot worse for the Phasals if either of us disappeared. He leaned in close. So, where's the girl? Not telling. Shonzi winced as he was kicked again. The framework of the tower clanked relentlessly around them. Nothing solid or with an overall symmetry, just a cruel, skinless construction of metal bones and moving mechanical innards greased with slime. Here and there, swathes of glutinous web were stirred by the incessant whirring of the devices. Have you noticed how time's changing? Vale said. The process gets very angry about it. The brute's terrified. Good, said Shonzi. That's when it's most dangerous, snapped Vale. That's why we've got to find the girl. She's something to do with the beginning, isn't she? I don't remember the beginning. Ask the Grumblies. If we find the girl, she'll lead us to the doctor. The doctor was destroyed in the beginning, Shonzi interrupted wearily. And maybe there'll be a way out of this place. If the process finds the future first, then we're all scrubbed. There was a hiss like a steam piston. They stared upwards and both cowered. High above them, the monstrous creature looped its way along the underside of a heavy iron girder. One footmouth of its molluscan body stretched down towards them, and the other foot suckered to the metal surface above. The ring of feeble little eyes set around the lipless mouth regarded them. Shonzi tried to scrabble away across the floor, but Vale kicked him back again. Process, it's me, Vale Phasal. Look, I brought you something. The process made a gurgling sound somewhere in its throat, a throat that extended from one footmouth to the other. Its clawed fins scrabbled at the girders and struts to find a hold. Once its free foot had found a grip on a jutting plate, the other foot released its hold and arched over to stare at them. The plate lowered its whirring way to the ledge. Vale stood his ground as the process completed a graceful cartwheel towards them. The ledge shuddered with the extra weight. The creature's body had a sheen of slime on it, green against the ruddy brown of its hide. For its size, it exuded a sickening vigour in its movements. It's Shonni Phasal, said Vale. I swore to you I'd find him. The process swung its head in close towards Shonzi. He choked in terror. This was the nightmare he had woken from regularly since the beginning. It had found a way out of his head back into reality. The ring of beady black eyes and the circle of serrated teeth around its cratered mouth. But the dream had no rotting stench. Its mouth contorted grotesquely as it struggled to form words unnatural to its shape. The sound was a dry, strangulated croak like scraping iron. The doctor! The process destroys him in the beginning. The stolen future. Where is it now? Shonzi's voice dried. The words cracked in his throat. Even his scream was locked inside, echoing around his thought-emptied head. Now disrupts, spluttered the process. Its head swung towards Vale and back to Shonzi again. The stolen future. Find it now. He can help me, said Vale. We'll both find the future for you. Shonzi Phasal stays. The disruption. It finishes. Shonzi shot a glance at Vale. You can't leave me here, not with that thing. But Vale was already bowing low to the monster. You're right, of course. With Shonzi here, there'll be no more disturbance to time's patterns in the city. Now do you believe that I can serve you? He bent towards Shonzi and gave his head the slightest shake. It meant, don't mention the girl, it doesn't know. Shonzi didn't have to read thoughts to know that. "Disturbance in city's first phase. The source. Find it," the process instructed. "Thank you," Vale said. He turned to leave, some of his swagger coming back. Shonzi watched him freeze on the edge, framed against the clacking mechanisms of the tower walls. The platform that had raised them to this level was gone. From below, other metal platforms were rising around the ledge. Guards were positioned on them, waiting as his escort. He turned back with a frozen smile. His head ticked. "I work better on my own, and quicker too." "Guards ensure no delay," was the croaked response. Vale was going to argue, but the insect heads began to chitter angrily. "Time. It is disturbed from beginning," the process continued. "The city's first phase. Search it now." "There is only now," retorted Vale, but the guard captain stepped in close beside him. Its movements jerked like a reluctant puppet. Shonzi caught the anger on Vale's face as he stepped out onto the captain's platform. The new search party sank below the ledge and were gone. The process hissed hungrily as it turned its attention back to its other prisoner. He knew what it wanted. Terrified as he was, all Shonzi would stutter was, "I won't tell you." Peccary leaned forward in the striped deck chair. "You were with the doctor, weren't you?" he accused. Ace was clinging desperately to the arm of the sofa. They kept telling her that the doctor was dead, but she knew otherwise, didn't she? "All right, so I was with him. What does it matter now if he's dead like you say?" "He trapped us here," Amnoni added from the other half of the sofa. "No," said Ace, "it's not true. The TARDIS was attacked as well." She didn't like the way Ryogas was standing behind her, and Chesspearl, sitting in the gold chair opposite, staring at her, not saying a word. They were hemming her in. "TARDIS?" said Peccary. "What's that?" "Our ship, Dumbo. And the doctor wouldn't attack you. I know he wouldn't. What about this Vale creep? Sounds like he's the real troublemaker." Peccary levelled a finger at her. "Since the doctor was destroyed, you are responsible." "What are you going to do about it then?" sneered Ace. Out of the distance came the cracked notes of the bell. "They'll be here soon," said Amnoni. "What do we do?" "Where does she come from?" butted in Ryogas. "Ask her where she comes from." Ace clung tighter to the sofa, trying to stop saying anything she'd regret. The doctor had lectured her about anachronisms. "I can't tell you that," she said tightly. "Not yet." She started surreptitiously sliding her hand down the sides of the cushions, searching for anything that might help. Her mother had often done the same through desperation when they were short of ready cash at home. "She's a liar," said Ryogas. "Am I? The gods abandoned us here. They need a sacrifice. That would save us." "Ryogas Talim, don't be foolish," said Amnoni. Ace had had enough. "Your bloody Shonzi says the doctor's still alive. He says the doctor taught him everything he knew. So you're wrong, aren't you?" She was starting to pull things out from the sides of the sofa. Old coins, rubber bands, biros, a broken quill pen. All of it useless. She made one last dig, and her fingers settled on something substantial. She slid it up into her palm. Chesspearl stood up and looked along the stream. "They're coming," she said. A group of guards was moving along the bank. "Hide her," said Amnoni. "She may find Shonzi for us." Peccary stared at Ace for a moment. "Get behind the double chair," he said. "We'll create a diversion. Then you run." "Thanks," said Ace. She glanced at the item she had retrieved, a Swiss army knife inlaid with the silver letters I.C. She pocketed it and turned to find Ryogas blocking the way. "No," he said, and caught her arm in a vice-like grip. "She was with the doctor. Hand her over, and the process may release us." Ace struck at him with her fist. "The doctor would have helped you, but it's too late. You'll spend the rest of your lives as slaves to the process. I know that because I've been across the river in the future and seen it." "The future," muttered Peccary with slow deliberation. "Yeah, so things don't look too good for you." "The gods may forsake us," he said grimly and glanced round at the others. "They may abandon us to torment, but we are still a crew." Sometimes it still worked. With one movement they bunched in on her. Doctor! She yelled as her arms were gripped. She was lifted bodily off the ground and carried to meet the expedition of approaching guards. Vale was at their head. Well, he smiled as he saw the new offering to their god. I'll see what I can do about extra rations. I'll be back, yelled Ace as they carried her away. You remember that? I'll be back.